of Deputy Humphreys, Dowds, Ferris, Phelan and Spring. And it's the Minister for Finance, and it concerns Directors' remuneration at the Bank of Ireland, and the Deputies have a total of 10 minutes. 21. They have 10 minutes in total to make an initial statement. Yeah, that's right. So 2 minutes each. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for selection. At this stage, I think everybody knows that the Bank of Ireland General Court is taking place in Burlington tomorrow. Resolution number 2 is to agree to report on Directors' remuneration as outlined in the annual report 2012. Minister, as you know, we hold 15% of the shareholding in that. The current CEO of Bank of Ireland receives a basic salary of €690,000, well above the government cap of over €500,000. On top of that, he receives other payments, including pension contributions, to bring his package to over €100,000. This is one of the architects of the lending bubble who directed lending in Bank of Ireland. The Minister of Finance indicated that he's going to abstain on this resolution. Can I put to you, Minister, that abstention is not policy, and it's not good policy in this case. We need to send a very clear and loud message that these outrageous salaries is not acceptable in a bank that this state and taxpayers had to bail out. So I urge you to abandon the policy of abstention on this issue and vote no in this case. Can I also just highlight the worry that the Bank of Ireland has very quickly lapsed back into its old ways, and the excessive payments of its executives is totally over the top. It has also been revealed that the bank is using market research to try and trick people off tracker mortgages to improve their bottom line so they can pay super salaries to their top executives. I ask you to exercise the state's shareholdings to make sure this doesn't happen, and it's raised at the annual General Court tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Dowds, 2 minutes.
Like Deputy Humphreys, I feel it's unacceptable that after years of being bailed out with taxpayers' money, the banks, and in this case the Bank of Ireland, are still refusing to put a cap on their executives' pay. And I do think that we as a government have been too soft on the banks for too long, and it's time for a minister to take a stand for the public when dealing with them. They're hounding mortgage holders, refusing to give credit to small businesses, and are still laughing in the faces of Irish people by their enormous paychecks. It's not as if a cap of 500,000 is too low a limit. I mean, the word really for their approach is greed, sheer brass-necked greed. As we know, the banks played an enormous role in driving this country off the cliff. We owe them nothing. And, Minister, I ask that the 15% voting rights that we have be used on behalf of the Irish nation. And could I just say in conclusion, one of the things that has bothered me most about the appalling behaviour of so many banks has been the undermining effect it has had on people's confidence in our institutions. And that has a very bad effect on our democratic country. And for that reason alone, I think people would really cheer at seeing this issue tackled. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Ferris, 2 minutes.
I must join with my colleagues in their criticisms of the Bank of Ireland, and I look to the Minister to ensure that the voices of the Irish people are heard at tomorrow's Bank of Ireland AGM. I have been contacted by constituents in Bray and elsewhere in Wicklow who are struggling to make mortgage repayments. I know this government is doing what it can to help those in arrears, and while this is very welcome, I also know that the banks must play ball. I was surprised to learn then that the Bank of Ireland carried out market research on tracker mortgages with a view to moving customers off them and thereby strengthen the bank's financial position. I would like the Minister to address this important matter when he attends the bank AGM tomorrow. I am not pleased with the idea that customers will be intentionally misled, and I am concerned that Bank of Ireland is not alone in attempting this underhanded tactic. I would also like it if the Minister could address what social dividend is to be achieved in terms of buildings or otherwise from the support shown by the taxpayer to the Bank of Ireland. I take the example of the Bank of Ireland on College Green. Why hasn't the state repossessed this building? Why has a request not least gone in from the Minister's representatives asking the Bank of Ireland to vacate these premises? The building they occupy is of significant historical value as the world's first purposed built two-chamber parliament. I would ask you, Minister, to ask the Minister to address these important matters with urgency at the AGM tomorrow.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Phelan now.
Thank you, Ciancurla, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this not only an important issue, an extremely important issue. Tomorrow morning sees the annual General Court of Bank of Ireland, where the nation is represented by our Finance Minister, Michael Noonan. The nation holds 15% of the bank's shares and, as such, is one of the biggest shareholders in the bank. Many items will come up at this AGM. One of the most important will be the remuneration of directors. It has emerged recently that the Chief Executive of Bank of Ireland, Mr Richie Boucher, was in receipt of over $840,000 per annum, including salary and pension contribution, even though there is a cap on such salaries of $500,000. This would seem to me to exercise a blatant disregard for the current economic situation in this country, and further highlights the high-handed attitude to the Irish people who are struggling to make ends meet. How can it be argued that Mr Boucher should receive such remuneration when ordinary men and women on the street cannot get an overdraft, an extension to their loans, or indeed a mortgage? The bank's doors are closed to the people who need them most, but it seems not so to its directors. Our small and medium enterprises are starved of cash. Our farmers are trying to resort to Teagasc and to the Minister of Agriculture to try to bail them out with fodder for starving animals, only because the banks will not play ball. Well, I'd like to ask Minister Noonan if he is going to play ball with the Bank of Ireland. The feeling on the street, Minister, is that the big companies and the banks, as well as the big men and women, are still coining it, whilst the ordinary man and woman are struggling very, very hard against all that this economic situation is throwing at them. The word on the street is that little or nothing has changed. It is time that we put things right, and you, Minister, have an opportunity tomorrow morning. I urge the Minister to strike a blow for the people of Ireland, the people who we represent, and say no to the bankers and say no to the huge salaries, and restore some faith to the Irish people that we will do right by them. Thank you,
Thanks,
Councillor.
Deputy Spring.
Thank you, and thank the Councillor for choosing this topic. This is the second time I've raised this issue with Minister Noonan, and in light of the fact that Mr Boucher appeared before the Finance Committee on the 1st of November 2012 and showed nothing shy of a contemptuous attitude towards this House and our positions as public representatives, I think it's fitting that we have representation at the meeting tomorrow of Bank of Ireland. There is no doubt about it that the banking licence application under the Central Bank Act of 1971 defines the responsibility for proper management and control of the credit institutions and the integrity of the systems resting solely with the Board of Directors. Mr Boucher joined Bank of Ireland in 2003 and became a director in 2006. Not only has he been remunerated for his time as an employee, but surely to God we can question whether or not his position as a director was one that benefited the shareholders, the state, or was in breach of the Central Banks Acts of 1971. I'm of the opinion that Mr Boucher should have a shot across the bow, because if we are public representatives, I can tell you that every member of the public that I have met would like to be at that AGM tomorrow. Many of whom have never dabbled in shares, are not a shareholder, yet they have felt the full brunt of the inability of directors to govern a bank in a prudent manner that doesn't deflect away from the nation. I think that the people of Ireland would like to see a cap on it, and I think Mr Boucher should be put in his place. And as a matter of fact, he's one of the few remaining directors of the banks. I believe 55 have been removed from 2007. However, his position is something to the people of Ireland that is not worthy of the remuneration that is on offer at the moment, and it is also something that I think says that the old banking systems still has a hangover inside there, and the people of Ireland want to see a 15% execution to say, no, enough is enough. Let's get back to what is morally correct, financially correct. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Minister. Has 4 minutes to respond.
Last Count Corla, the primary focus of the issues raised by the deputies appears to be the voting intention of the Minister for Finance as a 15% shareholder on behalf of the state on resolutions concerning remuneration and election of directors at the impending annual general court of the Bank of Ireland to be held tomorrow, April 24th. In that regard, it might be helpful and useful, Last Count Corla, if I outline the operational relationship that exists with the bank and the general policy on remuneration at the covered institutions before dealing with some of the more specific points that have been raised by colleagues. The relationship framework with the bank provide that the state will not intervene in the day-to-day operations of the banks or their management decisions. These frameworks, which are bank-specific, are published on the Department of Finance's website, having been agreed with our international partners, the Troika. They recognise that the covered institutions remain separate economic units with independent powers of decision, and that the boards and management teams retain responsibility and authority for determining their institution's strategy and commercial policies and conducting their day-to-day operations. The present policy on remuneration at the covered institutions dictates that no individual may receive annual aggregate remunerations, excluding pension contributions, exceeding €500,000 unless specifically authorised. This overarching policy is now supplemented by the inescapable conclusion arising out of the recently published review on remuneration practices and frameworks at the covered institutions conducted by Mercer, that is, the remaining institutions still incur losses. Their respective cost base needs to be reduced further. This is essential if we're going to return to profitability and be in a position to support the economy and repay the state's investment through return to private ownership. On behalf of the government, the Minister for Finance has directed the banks to come up with plans as to how they intend to address this issue in a manner that can help meet the state's objectives. I expect the value of these plans to mean a savings of somewhere between 6 and 10% of total remuneration costs through reductions in payroll and pension benefits, new working arrangements and structures that deliver efficiency gains. The Minister has not directed the specific measures that each bank should take, respecting their differing paths to profitability and relationship with the state as explained above. I expect to receive an outline of each bank's strategy by the end of April. However, I do not expect that any of the measures proposed will require sacrifices to all employee levels and strong leadership to be exercised by the banks in delivering a timely manner. The stakes for all are all that high. I readily acknowledge the sacrifices and changes made by bank employees to date at all levels and recognise that this has been achieved without major industrial unrest in what is a critically important sector of the economy. However, it can never be forgotten by management and employees of these banks, both past and present, that without enormous cost to Irish taxpayers, these institutions would not have survived, and this needs to be borne in mind during future discussions. It was in this context that the Minister decided to abstain on the resolution to consider the report on directors' remunerations. In regard to the other resolutions, I can confirm that the Minister has voted in favour of each of them, one of which relates to the election and re-election of the bank's directors. In relation to some of the more specific points raised by the deputies, I can confirm that the bank is in compliance with the existing policy on remuneration. As I mentioned, the present policy and previous iterations of it allowed for exemptions. It was under this parameter that the previous government authorised a salary for the present CEO of the bank in excess of the then salary cap of €500,000. I'm reluctant to discuss the remuneration details of an individual on the floor of the House. However, such details are well known, having been published in annual reports of the bank over the last number of years. The deputies will appreciate that this was the position that the Minister for Finance faced on this particular issue. They will also be aware that the strong legal advice available to this and previous governments is that pre-existing contractual commitments have to be honoured. In the case of the new CEO appointments at AIB and permanent TSB, respectively, the Minister ensured that the policy remuneration was observed and continues to be held.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Humphreys, just 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I just briefly do on the day-to-day operations? Minister, I'm not asking you to interfere. I'm asking you to operate the 15% shareholding by the taxpayer in the bank on the cost base to be reduced by 6 to 10%. That normally means ordinary working people in the banking sector. I ask you tomorrow to raise the issue of senior executives on outrageous salaries and not the ordinary day-to-day worker in the bank. On the election of the bank, the directors to the bank, I have grave concerns over some of the directors that are being re-elected. Can I also ask you, as a shareholder of banks returning to their old ways, and if you look at a €250,000 mortgage over the period of time, if it's a tracker, could be worth up to €100,000 to that person with that mortgage. And I'll point out to the terms, and I'll just read this one example from the market research. Just finish on this. The findings will be used to inform and develop attractive products to encourage tracker mortgage holders to move off the product and ultimately to improve the overall profitability of the Bank of Ireland's mortgage book. And that is to the detriment of ordinary tracker mortgage holders. We need to exercise our 15% stakeholder. I'd ask you to do that, Minister.
Okay, Deputy Dowds.
Thank you, Catherine. In supporting Deputy Humphreys, could I mention 2 points? First, passed on to me by Deputy Matthews, for which I thank him. The CEO currently has 9 TD salaries. 9 TD salaries. I appreciate we only have 15% of the vote there, but I think it would send a very important mark for the people of Ireland if we used that against having such a high salary. And we are in a situation at the moment, Minister, as you know, where we are having to ask public servants to again take a pay cut. And it just would put us in a stronger moral position if we requested that, as obviously we are going to request of ourselves that we take a pay cut too. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Ferris.
I'm giving my time to Deputy Spring.
Oh, fine. Okay, Deputy Phelan is next then.
Yes, I'm also doing the same, Ceann. Thank you.
Deputy Spring.
Thank you very much. Minister, such blind unawareness of considerations other than commercial interests and short-term commercial gains is totally inappropriate for Mr. Boucher at this point in time. I think it is upon us as public representatives to exercise our 15% and to send a message to Bank of Ireland and every other licensed institution in this country that the consequences of any reckless behaviour or any banking methods that are not commercially viable, that are not prudent, that those people should be sacked in some people's minds, but they should not be held in a position where they should be compensated. Compensated for it in a way that is far in excess of what anybody else in society is being paid at this point in time. As a former employee of banking institutions, including Bank of Ireland, I can tell you that many of my former colleagues are now looking at Bank of Ireland CEO and Mr. Kane, who is now a director, who lost bonuses in the UK because of the way that he conducted his behaviour over there, yet he finds himself in the position of authority when in Bank of Ireland here. Former colleagues, people working in banks at the moment that are the front desks, are looking at losing their jobs. They're concerned. They've got massive debts. They're of a generation that are looking at Mr. Boucher and his ilk and saying he's not aware of what is morally correct and what is financially correct in this country. So, Minister, I would urge Minister Noonan to go tomorrow morning, use his 15% on behalf of the people of Ireland, We're elected representatives, public representatives, and the public don't want to see bankers walking out with sunset golden cheques in their back pocket. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, very briefly.
Well, firstly, I fully understand the frustration that colleagues have articulated in this House concerning this issue. And what is absolutely clear is the firm intent of the government to make sure that the new banking model that will be operating in this country is a banking model that is sustainable and that is responsive to the needs of the economy. Enormous funds have been put into these banks by the Irish taxpayer, and it is crucially important that they are the engines of growth behind our economy, and that requires significant cultural change in the model which virtually collapsed this country. Secondly, can I say this? It would be wrong of anyone to describe this as the Minister's position. It is the government's position. The government's position is well known and it is clear following the publication of the Mercer report, and it is thus very simple, that we expect to receive from the covered institutions by the end of April very clear plans of how they are going to reduce their cost base by somewhere between 6 and 10%. And it will be a matter for those banks to bring forward those plans in a circumstance where already significant deleveraging within the banking system has occurred following the announcement that we took in March of 2011 and coming into government as a government. And I think it is appropriate that the greater change within the banking system in terms of the reductions in salary would be at the very top end rather than at the bottom. But we will wait and see what they produce by the end of April. But that is the government policy by all members of the government, that that plan must be produced in each of the institutions by the end of April. The key task that we face right now, as deputies are aware, is to return the banking system to profitability. And we're determined to do that, to ensure that we get our money back as taxpayers. And finally, can I say this, last Count Corla, while understanding the deep frustration that colleagues have articulated, and I suspect and I know that to be the majority view in the country, we have also negotiated as part of our presidency the CRD4 directive, which is vitally important because this puts significant limits on the entire bankers' bonus and pay culture that was at the heart, the rotten heart of the European banking system for the past decade or so. And that is a significant achievement of the government, of our presidency, and it is something that the Irish banks will be operating under when they return to profitability.
Thanks, Minister.